Don't sit there acting confused. You expect me to believe this is your vehicle?
It is registered to me. You verified that.
Registered doesn't mean earned. Cars like this don't just land in the hands of someone like you without something shady behind it.
Am I being charged with a crime?
At 9:47 on a quiet Sunday morning along Meridian Boulevard in Crestwood, a matte black Lamborghini Urus rolled through a green light at the intersection of Walnut and 5th. The driver signaled, changed lanes, and continued at exactly the posted speed limit. 6 car lengths behind her, Officer Brent Hargrove, 42, a 16-year veteran of the Crestwood Police Department, sat behind the wheel of his patrol cruiser and watched. His dash cam was running, his body camera was active. Both would later confirm what happened next. Hargrove followed the Lamborghini for 6 full blocks. He didn't activate his lights. He didn't run the plates. He just followed, watching, waiting for something he could use. At the 7th block, he hit the sirens. He called it in as a suspicious vehicle, possible stolen, and noted a failure to signal during a lane change. The dash cam would later show the signal blinking clearly, 3 full seconds before the merge. The driver, who pulled over without hesitation, placed both hands on the steering wheel and waited calmly for the officer to approach, was Federal Judge Genevieve Okafor-Laurent. She was 53 years old, a sitting judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the 4th Circuit, and one of the most respected jurists in the federal system. She was on her way home from visiting her elderly mother across town. She wore a linen blouse, sunglasses pushed up on her head, and no identification that would mark her as anything other than what Hargrove had already decided she was: a black woman driving a car he didn't believe she could own. Officer Brent Hargrove had been with the Crestwood Police Department since he was 26 years old. In that time, he had accumulated 31 civilian complaints, the overwhelming majority filed by Black and Latino residents. The complaints described a pattern that never changed: pretextual stops, aggressive questioning, searches conducted without consent or probable cause, property seized and never returned. Hargrove had earned a nickname in the neighborhoods he patrolled most heavily. Residents called him the Collector. Not because he collected evidence, but because he collected belongings. Cash pulled from wallets during traffic stops, jewelry removed during pat-downs and logged as potential proceeds of criminal activity, electronics confiscated under civil asset forfeiture statutes that allowed police to take property without ever filing charges. Over the past 5 years alone, Hargrove had seized more than $340,000 in cash and personal property from citizens. Almost none of those seizures led to arrests. Almost none of that property was ever returned. 2 prior cases involving allegations of planted evidence had been quietly settled by the city before reaching trial. Internal Affairs had reviewed his file multiple times and closed every investigation without action. His supervisors described him in evaluations as assertive and proactive. The police union representative, a man Hargrove met for drinks twice a month, had personally intervened to block 3 separate disciplinary recommendations. Younger officers who questioned his methods were told to mind their own calls. Those who pushed further were transferred. Hargrove operated with the confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable. And on this Sunday morning, with his lights flashing behind a Lamborghini Urus on Meridian Boulevard, he had no reason to believe that was about to change. Judge Genevieve Okafor-Laurent was not the kind of person who announced herself. She never had been. Her father, Chukwemeka Okafor, came to the United States from Lagos in 1974 with $200 and a work visa. He drove a taxi in Washington, D.C. for 31 years, 6 days a week, often pulling double shifts so his children wouldn't carry the debt he did. Her mother, Ruth Ann Laurent, grew up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, the granddaughter of sharecroppers. She cleaned office buildings at night and took community college classes during the day until her body gave out before her ambition did. Genevieve was the youngest of 3. She earned a full scholarship to Howard University, graduated summa cum laude, and was accepted to Yale Law School, where she was one of 9 black women in her class. She clerked for a Supreme Court justice. She spent a decade as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, trying cases involving police brutality, unlawful search and seizure, and systemic discrimination in law enforcement agencies across the Southeast. 9 years ago, she was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. She had since authored or joined rulings in more than a dozen landmark cases involving police misconduct, qualified immunity, and constitutional violations under the Fourth and 14th Amendments. Legal scholars described her opinions as surgically precise. Defense attorneys feared her bench. Civil rights lawyers cited her rulings like scripture. None of that was visible on Meridian Boulevard that morning. What Hargrove saw when he looked through that window was a black woman in a linen blouse sitting behind the wheel of a car he had already decided wasn't hers. And that was all he needed. Hargrove approached the driver's side with his right hand resting on his belt. His body camera captured the angle from his chest. The dash cam recorded the wider frame from the cruiser. Both were rolling. Both would preserve every word of what came next. He didn't greet her, didn't introduce himself. His first words were a demand. "Whose car is this?" Judge Okafor Laurent looked up at him, hands still on the wheel. "It's mine. You have proof of that?" She reached toward the center console slowly, movements deliberate and visible. "My license and registration are right here." Hargrove took the documents and studied them far longer than necessary, flipping the registration back and forth, holding the license up as though comparing the photo to a face he had already decided didn't match the vehicle. He walked back to his cruiser. He ran the plates. The vehicle came back registered to Genevieve Okafor Laurent. The license was valid. No warrants, no flags, nothing. He sat in the cruiser for nearly 4 minutes. Then he got out and walked back to her window. The body camera captured what came next without interruption. "Step out of the vehicle." "For what reason?" Okafor Laurent's voice was steady. "I need you to step out." "I've provided my documents. Everything is in order. Why am I being asked to exit my car?" Hargrove leaned closer. "I'm detecting the odor of marijuana coming from inside this vehicle." There was no marijuana in the car. There had never been marijuana in the car. Forensic analysis would later confirm that no trace of any controlled substance existed anywhere in or on the vehicle. But in that moment, on the side of Meridian Boulevard, with no witnesses yet watching and both cameras running, Hargrove had just manufactured the one claim he believed would give him the authority to go further. And he intended to. "Step out, now!" Judge Okafor Laurent opened the door slowly. She placed one foot on the pavement, then the other. She stood upright, hands visible at her sides, and spoke clearly enough for every microphone in range to capture it. "I am complying with your order under protest. I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle." Hargrove didn't acknowledge a single word. He took her by the arm and moved her to the rear quarter panel of the Lamborghini, positioning her against the car with both palms flat on the matte black paint. He patted her down with hands that moved too slowly and pressed too hard, running his palms along her sides, her waist, her pockets. She stood motionless, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the street ahead. A second patrol unit had already arrived. Officer Nolan Fitch, 29, 5 years on the force, stepped out and approached. Hargrove jerked his head toward the open driver's door. "Toss it." Fitch hesitated. His eyes moved from the woman standing composed against a $250,000 vehicle to the registration document sitting clean on the hood. He opened his mouth like he was going to ask something, then didn't. He reached into the car. They emptied her purse across the hood. Wallet, reading glasses, a leather planner, a tube of hand cream, receipts. They opened the glove compartment and pulled out the owner's manual and insurance papers. They lifted the floor mats. They searched the center console, the door pockets, the trunk. In the back seat, they found a small zippered bag containing her mother's prescription medications. Hargrove unzipped it, spread the bottles across the leather seat, read the labels one by one, then left them scattered where they fell. They found nothing illegal, because there was nothing illegal to find. Across the street, in a second-floor window of a brick colonial, a woman named Celeste Gerard had been watching since the lights first flashed. Her phone was recording. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Hargrove stood in the middle of the road, feet apart, hands on his hips, staring at the open doors of a vehicle that had given him nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband. No justification for a single thing he had done in the last 20 minutes. The body camera on his chest kept recording. He turned back toward Judge Okafor Laurent, still standing where he had placed her, palms flat against the side of the car, and what came out of his mouth next would be replayed in federal court, in news broadcasts, in training seminars, and in living rooms across the country. Let me ask you something. A woman like you, driving something like this, how does that happen? She said nothing. He stepped closer. Did your boyfriend buy this for you? Some rapper? Some dealer? Because I've been doing this a long time, and cars like this don't end up with people like you unless something dirty is going on. His voice was casual, almost conversational, as if he were stating something so obvious it barely needed saying. This car costs more than you'd make in 10 years, so I'm going to ask you again, where did the money come from? Okafor Laurent turned her head slightly. Am I free to leave? Hargrove's expression hardened. You'll leave when I decide you can leave, not before. Angle. A second neighbor, 2 houses down. Angle. A second neighbor, 2 houses down, had stepped onto his porch and started filming. A passing driver slowed at the intersection, window down, phone raised. 3 cameras were now recording from 3 directions, and the body camera on Hargrove's chest made 4. None of them would miss a word of what had already been said, and Hargrove, standing in the middle of Meridian Boulevard, with his chest out and his badge catching the morning sun, had no idea that every syllable was building the federal case that would end him. There was a moment, captured clearly on the body camera, where Judge Okafor Laurent's eyes moved from Hargrove's face to the badge on his chest and then back again. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but lawyers who reviewed the footage later would describe it as the moment she made her decision. She could have ended it right there. 1 sentence. I'm a federal judge on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. The stop would have collapsed on itself. Hargrove would have stammered. Fitch would have frozen. Apologies would have tumbled out, fast and hollow and desperate. She knew that. She also knew exactly what that would mean. It would mean that the Constitution applied differently depending on who you were. That rights were not rights at all, but privileges extended to people with titles and revoked from everyone else. That a black woman driving a Lamborghini deserved to be searched and humiliated, unless she could prove she was important enough to be left alone. So she said nothing about who she was. Instead, she asked for his badge number. Hargrove stared at her. What? Your badge number. I'd like it, please. He recited it with reluctance, each digit clipped and hard. She repeated it back to confirm. Then she asked him to spell his last name. He sneered. Hargrove. Slow enough for you? She didn't react. She filed it the way she filed everything, with precision, without emotion, with the patience of a woman who had spent 9 years on the federal bench, weighing testimony, dissecting evidence, and holding powerful men accountable when they believed they were untouchable. She had judged cases exactly like this one. She had read transcripts full of the same language, the same pretexts, the same arrogance dressed in a uniform. Now she was standing inside one, palms flat against her own car, living every word she had ever read in a case file. Hargrove keyed his radio. I need a K-9 unit at my location, Meridian Boulevard, south of 5th. Judge Okafor Laurent looked at him but said nothing. The temperature that morning was already 87 degrees and climbing. She was standing on asphalt in direct sunlight with no shade and no water. In the backseat of the Lamborghini, her mother's prescription medications sat in the zippered bag Hargrove had torn open, bottles scattered across dark leather that was absorbing every degree of heat the sun could give it. 2 of those prescriptions were temperature sensitive. The labels said so clearly. Hargrove had read those labels. He didn't care. The K-9 unit arrived 28 minutes later. Officer Dean Sutcliffe, 36, stepped out with a Belgian Malinois on a short lead. The dog circled the vehicle once, then again. It showed no alert behavior. No sit, no paw, No change in breathing or posture. Sutcliffe looked at Hargrove. "I'm not getting anything." Hargrove shook his head. He paused near the rear quarter. "That's a partial alert. Go again." Sutcliffe glanced at Fitch. Fitch looked at the ground. Neither of them believed what Hargrove had just said, and the body camera caught the look between them clearly. Sutcliffe walked the dog around a third time. Nothing. Hargrove ordered the vehicle searched again. Fitch opened the rear hatch and moved things that had already been moved. Sutcliffe stood to the side, leash in hand, silent. Fitch spoke quietly, barely audible on the body camera audio, but recovered during forensic enhancement. "Maybe we should wrap this up." Hargrove didn't turn around. "Shut up and finish." By the time it was over, 57 minutes had passed since the initial stop. 57 minutes for a lane change that was executed legally. 57 minutes that produced no citation, no charge, no arrest, and no apology. Hargrove handed back her documents without a word. Judge Okafor-Laurent gathered the medication bottles from the back seat, now warm to the touch. She noticed the scuff on the driver's seat leather where Fitch had leaned his tool belt. She sat down, closed the door, and pulled away from the curb at exactly the speed limit. She did not look back. Hargrove watched the Lamborghini disappear down Meridian Boulevard and returned to his cruiser. He logged the stop as a routine traffic contact with no further action. He had no idea that the woman he had just spent an hour degrading would by morning have the full weight of the federal government bearing down on him with the force his badge had never prepared him for. At 7:15 Monday morning, Judge Geneviève Okafor-Laurent sat at her desk in her home office with a legal pad, a pen, and a phone. She did not call the Crestwood Police Department. She did not file a civilian complaint. She did not leave a message with Internal Affairs. She called the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. She identified herself by name and title. She provided her case number from the Fourth Circuit, her judicial appointment reference, and a detailed oral account of the stop, timed to the minute, citing the specific constitutional violations by amendment and clause. She then called the FBI field office and made the same report. Then the Office of Inspector General. Each call was precise, measured, and without emotion. She spoke the way she wrote opinions. Facts first, law second, conclusions last. By 8:30 a.m., she had submitted a written account, 7 pages, single-spaced, with timestamps drawn from her own memory and cross-referenced against the time she had noted on the dashboard clock during the stop. She requested preservation of all footage, Hargrove's dash cam, his body camera, Fitch's body camera, and the K-9 unit's records. She requested Hargrove's personnel file, his stop history, and his civil asset forfeiture records. Then she made one more call. Not to an agency, but to a civil rights litigation firm with a national reputation for police misconduct cases. She told them she was not calling for herself. She was calling because she wanted to know how many other people Brent Hargrove had done this to. People who didn't have a law degree. People who didn't have a title. People who didn't have the ability to make the calls she had just made. By the time Judge Okafor-Laurent closed her legal pad, the machinery of federal accountability was already turning, and Officer Brent Hargrove was on his way to work with no idea that his name was now in 3 federal databases. The footage arrived at the DOJ Civil Rights Division by secure transfer on Tuesday. Investigators reviewed every second from 4 separate sources. The dashcam came first. It showed the Lamborghini Urus approaching the intersection of Walnut and 5th, signaling a lane change 3 full seconds before merging and completing the maneuver cleanly within the posted speed limit. The failure to signal that Hargrove had used as his pretext for the stop had never occurred. The body camera footage was worse. It captured Hargrove's tone from the first word, the immediate demand to know whose car it was, the prolonged examination of documents that were in perfect order. Every one of them. Women like you don't. Every one of them. Women like you don't come by cars like this. Did your boyfriend buy it for you? This car costs more than you'd make in 10 years. Audio forensic enhancement recovered something the body camera microphone had barely caught in real time. Early in the stop, before Fitch had arrived, Hargrove had leaned toward his radio and whispered, "Bet you anything this thing's stolen or bought with dirty money. Look at her." The K-9 unit's records collapsed the marijuana claim entirely. Officer Sutcliffe, under questioning, admitted the dog had shown no genuine alert behavior at any point during the search. When asked about the partial alert Hargrove had claimed, Sutcliffe paused for a long time before answering. "There was no alert. I told him that. He said to go again." Investigators then pulled Hargrove's stop records. In the past 18 months, he had conducted 214 traffic stops. 178 of them, over 83%, involved Black or Latino drivers. Civil asset forfeiture filings showed he had seized more than $340,000 in cash and personal property during that same period. Charges were filed in fewer than 6% of those seizures. The rest of the property simply disappeared into the system, and the people it belonged to never saw it again. The investigators looked at the numbers, looked at the footage, and understood they were no longer investigating a single traffic stop. They were looking at a career. They arrived at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday without warning. 2 FBI special agents and 3 DOJ Civil Rights Division investigators walked through the front entrance of the Crestwood Police Department, carrying federal subpoenas and a preservation order for all digital records. They did not ask for a meeting. They served the documents at the front desk and requested immediate access to the Chief of Police. Chief Raymond Beckett, 58, came out of his office expecting a courtesy visit. His expression changed within 30 seconds. The subpoenas demanded Hargrove's complete personnel file, all 31 complaint records, every internal affairs investigation and its disposition, body camera server access logs going back 3 years, and all internal communications referencing Hargrove's stop activity, forfeiture records, or civilian complaints. Beckett's first instinct was to push back. He began asking about jurisdiction, about process, about whether the department's legal counsel should be present. The lead FBI agent let him finish, then told him the victim of the stop was a sitting judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. The color left Beckett's face, but the agent continued before the silence could settle. "Her title is not why we're here. We're here because the evidence shows a pattern in practice of civil rights violations by an officer your department has protected for 16 years. That's a federal matter, regardless of who he pulled over last Sunday." Hargrove was on patrol when the call came through ordering him back to the station. He was met in the parking lot by a captain who told him to hand over his badge, his firearm, and his cruiser keys. He was escorted inside, placed in an administrative office, and informed he was suspended pending a federal investigation. His face went tight. He asked what this was about. Nobody answered. Fitch was pulled from duty the same morning and placed on administrative leave. The union representative, Victor Spano, arrived within the hour, demanding to know what was happening. An FBI agent took him aside and said one sentence that ended the conversation. "Obstruction of a federal civil rights investigation is a felony, Mr. Spano. I suggest you cooperate fully and advise your client to do the same." Spano said nothing further. For the first time in 16 years, the machinery that had shielded Brent Hargrove went completely silent. 3 weeks later, the United States Attorney's Office for the District filed a federal indictment against Officer Brent Hargrove. The charges were severe: deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, filing false police reports, illegal search and seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment. The indictment ran 34 pages. It did not focus solely on the stop of Judge Genevieve Okafor-Laurent. It detailed a pattern spanning years. 47 identified victims, predominantly Black and Latino, subjected to unlawful stops, fabricated pretexts, warrantless searches, and civil asset forfeitures carried out without probable cause. It described a system in which complaints were filed and buried. Supervisors looked the other way, and one officer operated with impunity because no one above him had the will to stop him. Officer Nolan Fitch was offered cooperation terms within days of the indictment. He accepted. In his testimony to federal investigators, Fitch described what Hargrove was like between stops. The language he used in the cruiser when the body cameras were off. The casual way he selected targets based on race and vehicle type. The comments about certain neighborhoods and certain people that had become so routine, Fitch stopped registering them as unusual. He described an unwritten culture within the department where aggressive stop numbers were rewarded, where complaints from minority residents were treated as the cost of doing business, and where officers who raised concerns were quietly reassigned or frozen out of advancement. Fitch's testimony led investigators to two supervisors, Sergeant Dale Womack and Lieutenant Ira Fontaine, both of whom were named in the indictment as unindicted co-conspirators. Internal emails showed Womack had received at least 9 forwarded complaints about Hargrove over 4 years, and had closed every one without action. Fontaine had signed off on Hargrove's forfeiture paperwork dozens of times, without once questioning the absence of corresponding charges. Neither man had been careless. They had been deliberate, and the federal government intended to prove it. The trial began on a Tuesday in a federal courtroom 40 miles from Crestwood. Hargrove's defense attorney opened with a simple argument. His client was a veteran officer who followed his training, trusted his instincts, and made judgment calls the way officers did every day. He called it experience. He asked the jury to consider the pressures of the job. The prosecution responded by pressing play. The body camera footage from the Lamborghini stop ran first. The jury watched from Hargrove's own perspective as he fabricated a marijuana claim, emptied a purse across the hood, scattered prescription medication across a back seat, and told a woman standing against her own car that people like her didn't come by vehicles like this. Then prosecutors played footage from 6 other stops, different days, different drivers. The language was nearly identical. The tactics were the same. Each stop involved a Black or Latino driver. Each produced no charges. 12 of Hargrove's other victims took the stand. A retired canine training supervisor testified that no alert behavior had occurred during the Lamborghini search, and that the partial alert Hargrove claimed did not exist in any recognized training program. A use of force expert testified that every element of the search violated the Fourth Amendment. Judge Okafor Laurent took the stand last. She was introduced by name alone. To have a stranger's hands press her. To have a stranger's hands press her against her own vehicle. What it felt like to watch her mother's medication scattered across hot leather by a man who never once considered she might be telling the truth. She described the moment Hargrove told her the car cost more than she'd make in 10 years, and she paused. Not for effect, because the memory required it. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on every count. The sentencing hearing was held 3 weeks later. Hargrove stood in a dark suit, no badge, no firearm. The presiding judge, the Honorable Catherine Shao, addressed him directly. Officer Hargrove, you did not merely break the law, you weaponized it. You used the authority entrusted to you to target, humiliate, and rob citizens of their constitutional rights based on the color of their skin. You did this repeatedly, systematically, and without remorse. She sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison, among the harshest sentences for a civil rights violation by a law enforcement officer in the circuit's recent history. He was remanded immediately. Fitch received a suspended sentence for cooperation, but was permanently barred from law enforcement. His silence on Meridian Boulevard had cost him everything his testimony couldn't buy back. The Crestwood Police Department entered a federal consent decree, independent civilian oversight, mandatory demographic data on all stops and forfeitures, published quarterly, comprehensive retraining with annual testing, complete overhaul of internal affairs, including independent review of all racial bias complaints. Sergeant Womack and Lieutenant Fontaine were forced to resign. Chief Beckett announced his retirement 2 days later without public comment. The civil lawsuit was filed on behalf of Judge Okafor Laurent and 38 other identified victims. The city's attorneys reviewed the footage, the stop data, the forfeiture records, the emails, and the federal conviction. Settlement negotiations lasted less than a month. The final amount was $6.4 million, divided among victims according to severity and documentation. The money would matter, but what mattered more was the record. It could not be sealed, it could not be buried, and it could not be undone. Judge Genevieve Okafor Laurent returned to the bench without ceremony. She did not give interviews. She did not appear on panels about her experience. She let the record speak because the record was comprehensive and the record was permanent. But 6 months after the trial, she accepted an invitation to deliver the keynote address at a national legal conference on constitutional policing. She stood at the podium in the same composure she had carried on Meridian Boulevard and said what she had carried quietly since that Sunday morning. I did not tell that officer who I was, because who I am should not determine whether my rights are respected. The Constitution does not have a VIP lane. The room was silent for a long moment before the applause began. She used a portion of her civil settlement to fund a legal clinic specializing in representation for victims of discriminatory traffic stops, people who had been searched, seized from, humiliated, and sent on their way without charges, without apology, and without anyone to call on Monday morning. The clinic opened in a small office 12 minutes from Meridian Boulevard. Hargrove served his sentence in a federal facility where his former profession made every day harder than the last. He never issued a public apology. He never acknowledged wrongdoing. He maintained until the end that he had been doing his job. After the settlement. Traffic stop racial. After the settlement. Traffic stop racial disparities across the department had dropped by 61%. Complaints of discriminatory enforcement had fallen by more than half. Officers now recorded justification for every stop in writing, and every recording was subject to independent review. In the Oversight Board's office, mounted on the wall behind the conference table, hung a single framed image. It was a still captured from Hargrove's own body camera. It showed Judge Okafor Laurent standing beside her matte black Lamborghini Urus, palms flat against the paint, chin level, eyes forward. Beneath it, a single line in plain black type. The law applies to everyone, including those who enforce it. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.